And one of my big principles, you're no better than people around you. And I think leaders, if they think they're doing it by themselves, are in trouble.
What happens when we as leaders choose to see ourselves as no better than those we lead? Our guest today has lived the answer to that question. I'm your host, Tim Spiker, and this is the Be Worth Following podcast. On this show, we talk with exceptional leaders, thinkers, and researchers about what actually drives effective leadership across the globe and over time. It's the month of March, and on the Be Worth Following podcast, that means leadership lessons from the world of college basketball. You just heard from Bruce Weber. Coach Weber, who I had the opportunity to play for in my first 2 years of college, brings to the podcast today the experience of more than 4 decades in coaching, including 24 seasons and 497 wins as a Division I head coach at Southern Illinois, and Kansas State. Coach Weber is a 6-time conference champion who led his programs to 13 NCAA tournament appearances, including taking the University of Illinois to the 2005 National Championship game, a season in which he was named the consensus National Coach of the Year. And just for a little fun, here's a trivia question. Who is the only person to ever coach on one team at the same time, the top 5 players taken in a single NBA draft? That's right, the answer is Bruce Weber, as he was the head coach for the United States U19 team that won the FIBA Basketball World Cup in 2019. 10 of the 12 players on that team played in the NBA, with 5 of them being the first 5 players taken in the 2021 NBA draft. So Coach Weber is not only the answer to a fun trivia question, but he knows what it means to lead elite performers. Today, Coach Weber is a part-time basketball analyst for the Big Ten Network and a full-time grandparent, along with his wife Megan, to their 5 grandkids. In this episode, you'll hear why having a perspective that you're no better than the people you lead is so important to Coach Weber. You'll hear what it means to quote-unquote fly a jet as a leader. And you'll hear a compelling story about the morning Coach Weber personally observed the behind-the-scenes leadership of 11-time NBA champion head coach Phil Jackson and the great Michael Jordan. Now, you don't need to be a basketball fan to receive great value from what Coach Weber shares with us today. But for those of you who are, we have a little extra treat. At the very end of this episode, even after our usual sign-off, we have a bonus discussion with Coach Weber that is very basketball specific. On March 26, 2005, Coach Weber was involved in one of the most notable comebacks in the history of the NCAA men's basketball tournament. If you're a Hoops fan, you'll want to stick around for that conversation. But first, we get to hear, right out of the gate, a profoundly simple question we can all be asking ourselves as leaders, and about the leaders who most influenced Coach Weber. Here we go.
I think all leaders need to look at who was the person that influenced you. Why do you lead the way you lead? Would you want to be led by yourself? I think that's a really important question that you need to talk about. But for me, there's no doubt it started with my dad. He's a man, came over on a boat with my grandparents from Austria when he was young. Obviously, the simulation at that time, my grandparents spoke German. It was tough. He found athletics to be the thing that, gave him a chance. There's no doubt. But he never got an education degree. He never, he got his high school, but he couldn't go to college. He did all that type of thing. So, but he ended up coaching, working he actually had a real job, a sales job, but at night, he wanted 10 kids. We had 5, but he coached us all. He ran programs, youth programs. I mean, he literally is kind of a legend in Milwaukee. And, he just had a knack of bringing people together. And, he drove me nuts, to be honest. And he was really tough on me. The old school, German, Austrian, type thing. That's how we were brought up, it ended up, I'm fine with it. But, he with my friends, they would come to our house just to talk to my dad. I wasn't even there.
Really?
And
Wow.
and I go around the people that he influenced and helped, and through all the years, he had a lot of wisdom, but he didn't have like I said, the background education, but he had the common sense and stuff. So he was real important. And then obviously as far as coaching and just dealing with people, it's Coach Keady. I mean, there's no doubt. He gave me a chance in the business, a GA, a year later, I'm at Purdue, it's like, just like a dream. I mean, it's unbelievable. But uh, I would tell you, and you played for Coach,
Yeah.
and yeah, and again, one of the most successful Hall of Fame, Naismith Hall of Fame, everything's whatever, third in the Big Ten in wins, and 25 years at Purdue, unbelievable. But he wasn't always the best X and O guy.
Yeah.
And I think I fit in a little bit that way. Kevin Stallings, some of the guys that were with us. But Coach was an amazing leader. And some of it was bass backwards, as he would say. You didn't understand why he did things or how he did it, but he had great common sense, a lot like my dad. He had a people feel. He had, he really cared. He got after them. I mean, he cussed them out like in every words. And you probably had a few of those, but at the same time, then he was your friend after that. And I still remember one day, I got real mad at Brad Miller, NBA player, great player.
Look, I'm just going to go ahead and say knowing a little bit, I think there's plenty of opportunity to get mad at Brad Miller.
Yes, that was
okay.
that was a given. Not every day, but almost every day. But
yes,
I think I kicked Brad out of practice, and and then I was so mad, and this and that, and so I go back up to the office after practice, and their coaches laughing with Brad. And it just like threw me for a loop. And I like, because I'm a young guy, you got to understand, I got an opportunity with Coach Keady. I'm 22, 23 years old, at Purdue. And so I'm still learning this stuff. And I'm like, golly, and then there was another occasion where another player I got mad at, and Coach called me in one day and he goes, hey, you're mad at, it was actually Ryan Burning. He said, and Ryan was one of the best kids on the team, but I don't know why I was mad at him. And he said, Coach just said, why you mad? I know why you're mad at him, but who's the adult in this situation? And I said, I kind of felt like, I wasn't that old, but I said, well, I guess I'm an adult. He goes, well, then act like it and talk to him. He needs you. And so, here I learned so much from that. I think that one instant that, if you're disappointed in somebody, you're mad at somebody, that they need you. If you're the right leaders, are going to go help the person out of it. And, instead of me not talking to him, it wasn't helping anybody, including Ryan or myself, because it was in my, it's in there. You're angry the whole bit. So, so it was just a little thing, but Coach was just amazing at getting the most out of the talent, getting them to be together, creating a family atmosphere, making Coach has his faults. We all know them. And that if you've been around him, and he's not perfect by any means, but as far as leadership, he was the most influential of all the people, again, with my dad. So I can't say enough about him. I think he's in the Hall of Fame because more of his leadership and his ability to bring people together than maybe for his coaching ability.
What you just said is so important in terms of his feel for people.
Yes.
When we had him on the podcast, the title of it was Winning by Treating People Right.
Yes.
And as you just share those couple of stories there, it's amazing. We're sitting here however many years later, and we're talking about people that have influenced us. And you remember the moment that Gene Keady said, who's the adult in the situation?
Yes.
And like just that type of impact that people can have with us.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And this, it's just not you and me, Tim.
No, right.
We have guys that, played 40 some years ago, 45 years ago with them that are congressmen, CEOs, all this stuff. And they'll text me or call me and say, I made my bed today. And I'm like, because Coach, you remember that. He always said, get up and do something, accomplish something, make a bed. He just had a knack of that. Um, and the common sense part was just, I always saw his Kansas humor. I don't, country cowboy humor. He would say things, Matt Painter will be at middle of practice and he'd run up to me and say, Coach, are there really 3 peckered billy goats? And I'm like, Matt, what do get back in practice? Or Brian Cardinal would say something,
That's
that they
hilarious.
remembered from,
Yeah.
Coach's sayings, or, you heard them all, but they were country. I don't know, my wife and I, Megan, we laugh all the time, that things he would say, but it would, again, it brought you to remember it. He just had that knack of doing that.
Yeah. For me, I mean, there's been so many things with apparently we're doing a double episode about Gene Keady since we had him on before. Now, I want to get to we want to spend some time talking about Bruce Weber here. There's so many things that Coach said, like those things. I remember, we had the emphasis of the day.
Yes.
And once in a while, it was about basketball. It was almost always not about basketball.
About life.
I share that with people like, Coach Keady was investing in us as people, not just as athletes, which stuck with me. But that phrase of you're never as good as you think you are, you're never as bad as you think you are.
Yep.
I've encountered that so many times in business. Because, you don't get too high, you get the big opportunity you were hoping for, or you have a great success. But also, when you feel really bad, it's probably not as bad as you think it is.
Yeah.
And just some of those little concepts that are, common sense. But it's also wisdom. It's common sense, but it's uncommonly applied, which is why it sticks with us so much.
I was going to add, like, one of my players once told me, he said, Coach, you're a prophet. And I just laughed. And he goes, how do you see these things ahead of time? And you brought up the word wisdom and experience. And that's, through all the years, it's another young man and a different person, but their experiences growing up are very similar. And, you just know what's kind of going to happen or help them through situations, and because somebody else had been through it before. And I think that's what, I talk about my dad, the common sense wisdom, Coach Keady, common sense wisdom. I think it's so important. And I think sometimes, and not all the time, but in business, and some of our leaders now don't have those experiences and that wisdom to deal with people. And that's where they fail.
Well, unfortunately, and I think, my opinion is that media and social media have played a huge role in this, but we've got people that are so majoring in the optics of things that we are, in many cases, are letting go of the substance of things. And that actually really concerns me when I look at the world. When I look at a generation like my kids that are growing up, they'll never know a world without social media, let alone the world that I knew without the internet.
Yes.
And there's such a public perception constantly going on in that space, and that does concern me about what's coming. But it also, frankly, it creates opportunity, because if you've got young leaders who are willing to major in substance instead of how things look, they're going to stand out, and they're going to have a lot of opportunities because of that. But I want to come back to your dad for just a second, because I think it's really profound to have a base like that starting out. When people are coming, that's really amazing. People are coming over to your house, not even necessarily to hang out with you. They want to spend time with your dad. How would you articulate, what did they get at it? What was it about that, that magnetic draw? Is like, I'm going to go over to the Webers, because Mr. Weber's an amazing guy. What was it that drew them there, do you think?
I just think what we just talked about, the common sense wisdom to help, one of the guys didn't have a dad. My dad would give them some advice, and they, to this day, these are my friends. My friends from grade school. I still have, people I went to kindergarten. Next week we live in Florida. We got a group coming down.
Do you really?
This goes
amazing.
back to kindergarten through grade school, through high school, all the guys. Um, so there was a unique thing, a unique bond. But again, I think it's just a common sense wisdom that he gave them, again, it's just he had that knack of making somebody feel good. Now he was hard on you. He was hard on my friends. I mean, he did not let up,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it just, but, he wanted the best for us. All he wanted for like our family, all of us are teachers and coaches. And he just basically told us, and, again, I said he was tough. He just said, you're all going to be teachers and coaches. There's no better life than to help somebody.
Wow.
And at that time, he said, and you have your summers off. Well, we all know you don't have your summers off, especially if you coach.
Yeah.
But he thought that was, and everyone's teachers and coaches. My older, sister taught and coached. My brothers in the Wisconsin High School Hall of Fame. My younger brothers in the Illinois High School Fame, and my younger sister before she passed, she was teaching. So, he just thought that was the best thing, and that's what he was about. Even racial barriers. He took our group. We went and played in all black leagues, and I'm a grade school kid, and we went to the inner city, and I mean, he felt that experience. It was important for us to experience that, and and I guess my dad, just because he probably grew up speaking German, was kind of different, probably made had didn't have the perfect, youth as he came up, experiences that, made he felt like, hey, this is something you guys, and I think to me, it's, again, common sense, wisdom, worldliness, understanding that, he helped me when I got out in the world and dealt with people from all over the world, literally, and in the coaching profession.
Well, I think even as you talk about both your dad there and Coach Keady, there's the theme of wisdom, but there's also the theme of not sparing you the feedback that you need to hear. And
Yes.
I think there's a really interesting thing there. Again, I can lament, are we losing this now? But when you genuinely care about someone and care for them, I think that wins you an audience to share the hard feedback that people need to hear. Which isn't to say, like, that doesn't mean you don't figure out how to deliver it with some tact and encouragement. But this idea that I just think it's that care that wins you. That message. This is true for all of us, not just in athletics. When I know that somebody cares about me and they're telling me the hard thing I need to hear, it is received completely differently than when it comes from somebody if I'm not convinced that they're for me. And I hear that common reality between both your dad and Coach Keady.
Yes. Yeah, there's no doubt. And just caring about somebody is so important. And that's, to me, the best leaders are the ones that care, they're about people. And if and it doesn't matter how low on the totem pole, they are. I mean, and that's how I base all of my career and what I did. That, I obviously I was an assistant for a long time. And so I had to do a lot of other duties along the way that, probably I won't even talk about on this thing, but it's just all that helped to understand the importance of, down to the managers, anyone like involved in a basketball program, the academic advisor, whoever it might be, how important they are, and to include them and make sure that they feel like you care about them. And when that happens, then, you can get a lot more done. You can accomplish a lot more. There's no doubt. And as you said, you're willing to take in the tough love, that because, hey, we're all in this together and everyone cares about each other.
Yeah. Well, and you see it in evidence, with regard to the family that is Purdue basketball. And you and I were both at the reunion
Yes.
this summer, and you see lots of players, you see lots of managers. I saw Barry Stone. I hadn't seen Barry like, you see Rich Ruffin. Like, these are guys that you were with every single day for
Yes.
hours at a time, and they're a part of that family the same way that guys that played a lot, and were on the court, and you just feel that connection, because I think you're right. I think it starts with Coach Keady. But you mentioned being an assistant for a number of years. Talk to us a little bit about that transition from being an assistant to being a head coach. how that played out for you there. It's certainly not something that you'd only thought about for the first time once you took the job at Southern Illinois. So I'm just, we're not always the person in charge, even though we're leading our departments or our divisions. We might have other aspirations. Talk to us a little bit about what that process was for you, and then eventually deciding to leave Purdue to be a head coach at Southern Illinois.
Well, I'll be honest, I would have never left Purdue, but the new president, new AD told me that at all along I was probably going to get the job, and but they said you got to go prove yourself. We had a new guy, so I left, and then 1 year later, they called me back and said, "Will you come back?" And I'm like, "I just left. You told me to leave. I moved my family. I can't do that." But
wow,
one of the experiences I had with Coach Keady, he allowed you to do stuff, and we were so involved. And I think and one of my big principles, you're no better than people around you. And I think leaders, if they think they're doing it by themselves, are in trouble. And if they're not good people managers, I think that's it, they're going to be in trouble in the long run. But Coach let us do stuff. When I became a head coach, I had done pretty much everything that you have to do in the program. And some young guys now there's role specific in coming up. I did recruiting, I did travel, I did camps, I did, I was academic advisor. You can go on through all this stuff. And, so when I became a head coach, I thought it really helped me. But there were people that were worried about me that because I did so many things that I wouldn't allow other people to do something. And I think I did a conscious effort of making sure that I allowed others to do stuff. Now, I also really made sure that it was done right. I overlooked everything. There were people around the Purdue program that, if you remember the TV show MASH, and then there was a guy that named Radar, and I would, I knew what Coach needed ahead of time. His old saying, "Fly a jet." If leaders that if they're not flying a jet and looking ahead, you're in trouble, right? If you're flying a jet and it's going 500 miles an hour, you're not looking, 2 feet ahead. You've got to be looking. So, I think that was, I think I learned that from him more than anything. And so when I became the boss, I was flying a jet for our guys, and and some of them, when I got new assistants, and like they'd sit at the meeting and they'd give a suggestion. I'd say, "Okay, yes, but what happens now or what's next, or what happens now if something else happens?" And then they'd back down. And I said, "I'm not questioning what you're saying. I just want you to think about it. I want you to fly a jet to look at, and it's a play. We all, our coaches, they come in with a play. It's great, but what's next? What if, it gets scouted? What are we going to do next? Does it make sense to keep running that play? Because are there other options, other counters, other things?" So I think that's something that, as I went from assistant to a head coach, it helped me. Because I was flying a jet for Coach. I said earlier, and this is everyone has faults, everyone has weaknesses. And I think one of the reasons I was able to stay with them all that time, I think I was a good, I was some way opposites, because I worried about details. He didn't worry about details. And
he had you. He had you to worry about.
I did. And that's what I did. And so, but then when I became a head coach, I still worried about the details, but I wanted them to do it, but I made them think about it. And giving them a responsibility. But I think I got better at it, but I definitely oversaw it more than Coach did. He just trusted me. He just like, get it done. It's like, it didn't matter. And once I still got fired. I think it was 17 times I got fired by him, and through all the years. And, I still remember
You did really well for somebody who got fired 17 times.
Yeah,
so
he would, in the spring, he usually fired the whole staff in the spring. Every time he would do that. And except when we had the really good years, he couldn't find much fault, like, Glenn Robinson and some of those special years. But he would, and I remember like there was a new assistant, Jay Price, and we got fired on a Friday afternoon, and went home. And he goes, "What are we gonna do?" And I gotta, this and that. I said, "Oh, don't worry." But he goes, "What do you mean, don't worry?" I said, "I've been fired 10 times already. He'll be by Monday. He won't even bring it up." And he did it, but it was his way of making sure you were accountable, that you realize he's the boss, and that those type of things. So, but that, it just kind of all carried over from me being assistant to a head coach. That transition, they always say it's 2 feet, but it's a major 2 feet on that bench.
Yeah.
And, the assistants, they got all these suggestions and, we got to do this, but they don't see the big thing. I will tell you, Matt Painter didn't have quite as many opportunities. He started at Washington Jefferson with Tom Ryder, and then took the position where my brother went to Eastern Illinois with Rick Samuels. My brother left and went to high school, and and then he went with me to Southern. And then when he became head coach, Matt was all about basketball. He loved basketball. He's brilliant. He's his understanding of the game is amazing. So all of a sudden now you're overseeing a program.
Yeah.
And that first year, I mean, he called, if not daily, almost every day. What about this, coach? What about tickets? What about travel? What about meals? What about, all the things that he never worried about? But obviously he's a pretty good success story. So he learned.
It does seem like he's figured some of that stuff out.
Yeah. And again, Matt's smart, but he was smart enough to listen and learn. And again, we both had, Coach Keady in our background. Hopefully I helped Matt along the way.
Yes.
And I'm sure he has other people along that way also.
We visited with Paint for our March episode last year. And one of the things that was really striking to me about it, all you to do is be in about 2 practices with Matt Painter. And you're like, okay, this guy's going to be a coach, because his, like you said, his basketball knowledge is, I've been around the game my whole life, and he's still forgotten more basketball than I'll ever know. But when you listen to him talk about the way he's leading the program now, the really, really fascinating thing to me is, he's brilliant on the X and O's, but that is not the thing that's making Purdue special at this point in terms of, the X and O's are great. But you listen to him talk about how he cares about players and how he thinks about players, and his conscious commitment to see them as people and not just as leverage points. And I think to me, that's the separator, especially in a world that's obviously flooded with more money than it's ever been. How do athletes just get used for the benefit of others? And maybe you could say everybody's in on it, but ultimately I was really struck by how Matt talked about that, and talked about his own development as a human being, his own maturation as a person, and how that's played a role in the program. So it's great to be an X and O genius. But there's so much more. There's so much more to it than that.
Yeah, no, I was going to say Matt learned. He listened, he learned, he and again, he wasn't the greatest player. He had frustrations. Didn't play much as a freshman, sophomore. Got a little more time. Then he became a really solid player for us. And but people always ask me, along this way, this journey with Matt, just, did you know he's going to be a coach? Like, yeah. Kevin Stallings, I knew was going to be a coach. There's just certain guys are going to be coaches that I always thought Darren Williams, who I coached at Illinois, Darren would have been on like Matt, like Kevin, just brilliant basketball mind. But he just said, "Coach, I can't do it. You work too hard. You have to deal with too many knuckleheads. I can't do this." And it's sad because he, it's a guy that, really could coach. But but there's lots, that Illinois team, D Brown's coaching, Roger Powell's the head coach. It's kind of cool. Rich McBride, my SIU Sweet 16 team, we had the reunion in 20th it would have been the 20th. I think we got, they brought us back, and we had 7 guys that were coaching high school.
Oh, wow.
That's
7.
over half your team.
Wow.
And, it hit me, no wonder we were so good. These dudes loved it. They cared about it. So and it's just it's interesting. Conjo Martin, another guy that came through. It's just and for me that's really special, whether it's managers or former players or former assistants when they have success and move up in the world and to be help them and be part of that. There's nothing better, nothing
Well,
more rewarding.
I want to say one thing about fly a jet before we get too far past that. I hadn't thought about that in quite a while. And it was another one of Coach's things, that idea of, thinking 500 miles ahead. And it's such a simple concept.
Yeah, because it hits you and
Yeah.
how it still influences you. So I think two of the things that you brought up, especially in business, and I think about this all the time, like flying a jet. If you're a company and you're having success, and it's the other thing you brought up, you're never as good as you are. It's never as good as it seems, or never as bad as it seems. And companies, I always bring up Kodak film. Like
What a
cameras.
story. Yeah.
Did they fly a jet that they'd understand that cameras? It's just now companies that are able to look ahead and say, hey, yeah, we're fat cats right now and we're doing well, but this may change. The market may change. It might. And so you can't get too high. You can't get too low. You got to keep flying a jet. You got to keep looking ahead. And
Yeah.
that's what I think special leaders do. They're able to adjust. One of the greatest things to me about leaders that are successful is they're flexible and they're willing to change. And this is when I give talks about leadership, and I always bring up Coach Keady. One of the things that they would never ever think of with Coach Keady is that he was flexible and he was willing to change. And this dude had his toughness and his
Yep.
he scared you, and he scares me to this day. I mean, it's just but it's just he was willing to adjust to people, to adjust to the times. You think of all the things we had to do. And he told me this as a young coach. He said, if you want to stay in this business, you got to be flexible. And I'm not sure where he got that wisdom, but he had it from somebody. And it's so important. And you think about the addition of the 3-point line, the shot clock, and all the things. It's so important to be able to. Just a little quick story. Like when I got the Southern Illinois job, I did a lot of stuff for Coach. So before that, and I still was getting calls. And then one day he called and said, I have a question for you. And I'm like, Coach, you have a question for me? But it was about parents. And he said, are parents calling you? And I said, yeah, Coach, a few of them call. And he goes, can you believe it? These parents actually are calling me. And your parents, when we first started, parents were afraid of Coach. They didn't want to see him unless that meant their son was in trouble. And so, he said, they're calling, they're asking about playing time. He goes, how the hell do I deal with them? Just like, but obviously he was able to change and adjust and, so, and just hairstyles, whatever that might come up. He didn't like it, but he would adjust to it and accept it. And he'd tease you about it if you did something, but
the flexibility, it's a good point that you make about Coach Keady, because people see his toughness and his intensity and his desire to win, and they wouldn't necessarily equate that to flexibility. However, as these things, you got to see it behind the scenes. I think if you look at the results, there's a stretch that makes it so obvious that he was flexible, because Purdue, as you were there, Purdue won 3 Big Ten championships in a row. Side note, right after I left. I hope there's not a correlation between those things. But you win it in 93, 94. You win the Big Ten championship. You've got the number 1 player in the NBA draft, Glenn Robinson. Glenn goes on to the NBA. The next year, 94, 95, you win it on the back of now they're obviously everybody's playing a role, but you've got some primary players there that are kind of stepping up. You 2-3 guys that are the nucleus, obviously Zoe, Waddell. The next year,
we won it with the Ragamuffins.
You win the Big Ten championship, and if I'm remembering correctly, I don't think there was a single starter that averaged double figures. Yeah. So Purdue wins 3 Big Ten championships in a row and does it with 3 absolutely different teams. One where you've got a megastar, one where you've got a small nucleus of really, really good players, and one where you don't have any idea who's going to score tonight. I think that speaks so clearly to Coach Keady's flexibility, because if you're just one way of coaching and one way of playing, you can't do that. And not only Coach Keady, but you and the staff, you made adjustments to take advantage of what you had, and you won 3 Big Ten championships in a row with 3 completely different teams.
Yes. Yeah, there's no doubt. And we get Glenn, and he sends me to Rick Pitino to the Boston Celtics for 4 or 5 days. He goes, "We're going to put the press in. We're going to press." And so we pressed, but then, as you talked about, when we won the third year, it was with role players. I always joke we won with the ragamuffins, and we had to play a total different way. And in the '80s, when we won in '84, we had to slow it up, and then we didn't have size. We didn't have we lost Russell Cross to the NBA, and we won a championship, and we were picked 10th. We were picked 10th out of 10 teams, and we won that year, the championship. So he was able to adjust, change again. And it's something I really learned, and I think we all do. I'll be honest. I was on the phone last night with Matt Painter just about things, about adjusting, changing, because and I think that's the other part is, you're no better than the people around you. And you got to have people you trust, that you can talk to, that'll help you through things, that give you ideas. If you're not doing that, you're not growing. When you stop learning, you're done. When you stop changing, you're done. You're not gonna be successful. And it's just kind of part of that progression as a leader. I think it is, at least.
Yeah. You mentioned the word trust. Let's dive into that a little bit. That's something that we talk about with our clients a lot. We talk about, what does it mean to be a leader that other people can trust? What does it mean to continually work to become more trustworthy? I know that's a big thing in how you think about leadership. Talk to us a little bit about how you look at the issue of trust.
Yeah, I think, and I had this opportunity to take over programs at SIU. There was Rich Heron was a coach there, a longtime Southern Illinois guy. He was and had his struggles. Got a little old, had struggled. So I went in there. It was a tough situation. When I went to Illinois, Bill Self had left. And he, the players were mad at me because he left. The fans were mad at me. I'm like, I want to be here, and you're mad at me. He left you. I left K-State. Frank Martin and Huggs were there before, and they had kind of a good niche and a good. So each program you had to go into, I had pretty tough situation. One of the athletic director at K-State, John Curry, when he hired me, one of the things he told me, he said, "I'm taking you because you've been through this before, to win over after somebody that was well-liked, that maybe had their issues or whatever." But so it's just interesting. But one of the first thing I think is, you got to give them a vision. And this is, I don't know if Coach Keady ever understood it, but he always gave everyone a vision of what he wanted and be successful. And I think it's so important. Where are we going? You got to have, and I think along the way, there's got to be visual change. And each time I went to a school, I went to SIU, I always, when you talk about building trust, you got to talk to people, and one of the first persons you got to talk to in sports, there's always a best player, and you got to get him on your side, and it's the leader on the team, obviously. So, when I went to SIU, I asked them, what do they want? And they said, "Coach, we don't want to wear Reeboks anymore. They're horrible, blah, blah, blah." I had obviously, through Coach Keady, we had been Nike the whole time. I was able to, we were able to get a Nike contract and wear Nikes. And right away now, it's just a little thing, but it's like, a new vision, a new trust, and to do something that they wanted. They wanted Midnight Madness. And this is Southern Illinois, but they had seen it on TV, everywhere else, and they wanted to be part of it. And I still remember the first year, I said, we're going to do it. Matt Payne, coach, don't do it. And no one's going to be there. It's just, I said, hey, the guy.
I gotta say, for people who don't know what Midnight Madness is, let me fill in and then tell the rest of the story. Midnight Madness is when the clock strikes midnight, when you're allowed to start having practice according to the NCAA. The rules are completely different now.
Different
but at that
now.
time, we would have practice at the stroke of midnight. I remember we did it my sophomore year, and Mackey Arena was sold out at 12:01 because of this guy named Glenn Robinson. But anyway, so that's what Midnight Madness is. All right, go ahead, Coach.
I thought they came to see me and you.
Probably maybe a little less than that.
But it's just, so we have I said, Matt, he was young and single. Go to your buddies at the bars and, tell them to come. We got to have somebody here. So,
let's get them there.
They wanted a dunk contest. And this is a true story, Tim. We had a dunk contest. Only one of our guys made a dunk, and he got hurt on the dunk. He won, but he got hurt on the dunk. So, and we had maybe 500 people there, but those guys felt good about it. And they felt like they trusted.
You're talking about early wins that maybe not huge in the grand scheme of what you're doing, but relationally, it's a big deal.
Yes. So we didn't have any money. We did little things. We fixed the locker room. When I got to Illinois, I asked the players what they want. They said, Coach, we never go out to eat. We always have the meals in the hotel, and you know what hotel food is like. It's horrible and it gets boring. And you have 16 road trips a year or whatever, and you're eating dried up chicken and, it's stuff. So, I like to go out to eat. So we're going out to eat. So that first road trip, like we're going to, a Fleming's or a Ruth's Chris or, and those guys were like, this is so cool, and just, K-State and also the best players, when I got the K-State job, I went Rodney Magruder, and he played in the NBA for, 9 years. He DC kid. I went to see Rodney and his family. Yeah. And, I went to, when I got to Illinois, I went to Darren Williams. D Brown was the celebrity guy, but Darren Williams, I knew was the best player. And he's from Dallas, and he'd be the one that would transfer. D was from Chicago. He was, he was in every paper. He's not transferring from Illinois. He's, but so I went to see Darren and his mom. So, if Rodney's not on board, I'm in trouble. If Darren's not on board, I'm in trouble. So, and that's even in business. There's always something. I don't care if it's a church group. If it's, we just did a big thing, Megan and I, with Salvation Army with toys and stuff at Christmas. And, there's leaders in that group. You got to find that leader because they're influenced in everyone else. And that's all part of the, the trust factor that you're dealing with. So it just, I think it's talking to them, listening to them, being part of them, not just like directing them. And I always said, and this is part of me, I talked about being an assistant a long time. I helped pick up all the towels and, managers and clean the locker room and all that stuff. So even when I was a head coach, I got down and dirty. I like people like, what are you doing? You don't have to clean this up. Yes, I do. I'm helping everyone else. It's part of it. And when you talk about managers coming back and, Coach, you always helped us. You always, had our back or included them or whatever. And so, and the listening part, I think, is so, so important.
Yeah, I wanted to come back to that. I wanted to dig into that. So you talk about communicating with people and how important it is to talk. But under that umbrella, you're also saying, but you got to listen.
Yes.
Say more about that.
Yeah, it's so important. And I always joke, you might actually learn something from somebody when you listen.
What if you assumed that you were going to learn something? I mean, if nothing else, you may not agree with them, but at least you get to learn where they're coming from and what their perspective is, right?
But if you also find out what their dreams are, their goals, and that, can we get there? Now, sometimes you got to help them figure out their goals too, over the course of time. You got to let them say, I want to be an NBA player. Well, about a month later, since you're only getting in the game 8 minutes a game, it's just, you might not be an NBA player, but, Matt Painter, you might be a coach. It's just, there's that possibility. So, But that trust is really important. Being a people manager, getting everyone to buy in. To me, one of the, when you say learning from people, I got it because Coach Keady was connected with Tex Winter because he had Kansas State, and when Coach played football there, and then Tex was with the Bulls, so I got to go up to the Bulls practices and watch Phil Jackson manage people.
Wow.
Now Tex was the X and O guy. Phil was the guru, dude, all the stuff. And he would just, and then obviously he had the best player bought in, Michael.
Sure.
I went to a practice, and this is a true story. They practiced in the morning, NBA. They had to lift weights before practice. That was a thing the Bulls started, we started, Coach Keady kind of started. People don't realize no one lifted weights. When we started in the early 80s, again, fly a jet, Coach Keady's lifting weights. We had to figure out we were getting the players Bob Knight was getting at Indiana. But if over 4 years, that group we first got, they end up being picked 10th, but we win the league because they lifted weights and developed their bodies and got stronger and all that stuff. So, but to watch Phil Jackson deal with Tex Winter, letting him do his thing with the X and O's, letting Michael be the leader. I saw Michael Jordan just cuss out one of the guys because he didn't lift weights. Now they couldn't start practice because we had to wait for him to lift weights.
Oh, wow.
Phil just sat there with his arms crossed, chilling, Tex was doing it, working with individual dudes. And it just was. And then I saw Michael Jordan grab a guy's jersey and say, we practice hard. That's why we win championships. Again, Phil's just chilling, but it just, and again, he wasn't really chilling, but he just, he
oh, he's letting it play out. He's right.
Yes. Yeah. And again, to me, it's managing people, understanding your guys. I talked about earlier in any group. I don't care if it's at church, there's always somebody that they listen to.
As we wrap up today's episode, I want to give you a little more information about who we just spent time with in Coach Bruce Weber. See, back in 2012, after 9 seasons as the head coach at Illinois, Bruce Weber was fired and then took the head coaching job at Kansas State. Now, when Division I head coaches are fired, it's not usually an enjoyable experience for anyone. And yet what happened for Bruce Weber in that moment, because of who he is as a person, is worth noting. After he got let go, as he was moving on to Kansas State, on April 8th of 2012, in the Champaign News-Gazette, he took out a full-page ad. He paid for it himself, and here's what the ad said. It said, "Thanks to everyone in the Illini Nation for a memorable 9 years. Go Illini, go Cats, Coach Bruce Weber." And it had the logos of both Illinois and Kansas State there. I just share that so you get a sense of who he is as a person. That kind of grace, that kind of gratitude is so rare at the upper reaches of competitive athletics. It's very rare also in the upper reaches of just about anything, including business. But as we wrap up today's episode, I want you to know that story as it puts everything that Coach shared with us into context, a wonderful context of who he is as a person. So let's get back to a couple of things that we talked about. There was a combination that kind of landed in there of a couple of big ideas, I think, that when you put them together, it makes a really valuable combination for us as leaders. First, it's that idea that you're never as good or as bad as you think you are. And the second one we add with that one is this idea of flying a jet. Now, that second one, flying a jet, was about thinking ahead. You can't think about where you are. When you're flying a jet, you need to think 500 miles ahead. But this idea of combining those ideas so that when things have gone really, really well and we're tempted to think that we're all that in a bag of chips, flying a jet causes us to say, wait a second, what's coming around the corner? I need to think about what's coming the next quarter or the next year. I can't just be in this moment and ignore that. I have a responsibility as a leader. But now think about the opposite. When things are going really poorly, our results have tanked in an unexpected way. Well, flying a jet now essentially helps pull me out of that gutter a little bit to say, okay, yeah, this is bad, but our jet is flying, and before long, we're going to be 500 miles from where we are now. And are we going to be ready for that? So we need to turn our attention to get ready for that, even though we've had a bad outcome here. I think in either scenario, when you combine this idea with you're never as good or as bad as you think you are, plus fly a jet, that it's tremendously valuable to put those two ideas together to help us remember the responsibilities that we have as leaders and the opportunities that we have to help people move forward and to not get too high or too low. The last thing that I want to touch on as we wrap up is this idea. You heard it many times during the discussion. You're no better than the people around you. It's a very simple idea, but it's so powerful when that attitude and perspective comes from the leader. And so it gets me thinking, what would it look like if I thought I was better than the people I'm leading? One of the things that came to mind after I thought that is if I were on trial for being a sincere listener, would I be convicted? Or would people be able to see my body posture, my facial expression, even if they had access to my inner thoughts? Would they say, oh, no, he's not actually somebody who really wholeheartedly gives other people his time and attention? The second question, as we check ourselves, am I somebody who thinks of myself as better than others? When I've graduated to a leadership position, do I look at the things I used to do and think, you know what, that's below me now. I'm up here. Now, I'm not saying that we as leaders can afford to work multiple layers below where our responsibility is. That's actually a really bad epidemic in leadership. But I am talking about the attitude here. Do I look at the things that I used to have to do before I was in this position and now think, you know what? I'm actually a little too good for that right now. I've elevated past that. That might suggest that we're not really looking at the people around us as equals. Another thought is about our inner monologue. If people were able to see our thoughts and we're looking at the people that we're leading, would they see that we think about them as units of production to get a job done? Or would they see that inner monologue and see that we look at the people around us, the people we're leading, as people with lives and histories and families and priorities and hopes just like we have? And so that leads me to the question I want to leave you with today. And that is this: to what extent do you see yourself as no better than the people you are leading? Maybe the best place to look for that answer is to the inner monologue you have about the people you find most difficult to lead. This is Tim Spiker reminding you to be worth following and to follow us wherever you receive your podcasts. If you've heard something valuable today, please share our podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues. And if you're up for it, leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening. When we had John Beeline on, I talked to him about Spike Albrecht scored 17 points in the first half of the national championship. It's just a crazy experience. What was that like for you as a head coach as I was talking to him? I want to know, what is it like for you to have been the head coach of what is arguably the greatest comeback in the history of the NCAA tournament? You're down by 15 with 4 minutes to go. You were down by 7 with 1:11 to go. It's not like it was all of a sudden down to 2. Talk a little bit about your mental process through that. And to start that, I want to know, at every point for every athlete or coach, you're thinking about how are we going to win, how are we going to win. And at some point, you consider mentally, it flips over, you consider the possibility of losing. The rest of the time, you're just like, well, we're going to work this out. Down 15 with 4 minutes to go, had you gotten to the point where your mind had said, oh, we might lose this game?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And I was just dying. It's just literally I don't know if you remember the whole thing. My mom had passed away a few weeks before.
Wow.
And so there were a lot of drama. Obviously, we were number one, the whole thing. It just, and you just didn't think you're going to lose. And especially, I mean, we were so good, but they played unbelievable. And you start like, inside it's just, starting to eat you up, but you're trying to stay positive. I'll tell this, and I've told this before, I think it was under 4 timeout. And Darren said, I don't know what the score was at Darren Williams. He, again, said, hey, we still got whatever 4 minutes left. We've just cut it. We still have our goal in front of us. Let's go get it. And it kind of gave me life
How about that?
to be positive and kind of, get to a whole nother level. And again, it's better than the people around you. You know better than your best players. When your best players or your leaders in your group are the hardest workers, care about other people, care about, the group being successful. It makes it so much easier as a coach.
Yeah.
As a leader of a group. And, that in just, I go back when I see the game, it's on classics or it's something pops up. It'll pop up now with the NCAA tournament. And like, I'll see stuff I didn't even remember happen. Just
really?
unbelievable. Like, I had subbed a guy named Jack Ingram in, on a timeout, and he gets a deflection that hits the ball, hits to Darren. Darren hits the 3 to tie. And I forgot I had and I had changed the matchups too. And when they're going out in the court, I said, Jack, no, you guard him, blah, blah, blah. And then he gets the tip. So, it's just like you start remembering things that just little things, Darren was cramping at the end in overtime, and he was our best defender, and we knew they were going to go to the lefty, and Darren goes, Coach, I can't guard him. You got to put
right?
Yeah, you got to put somebody on him. And I said, okay, but then they did something where we had to switch, so Darren ended up on him. So it just, like little things like that. But it was just, it's unbelievable to be part of that. Coach P-Line, that was the same weekend. They were part of a win to get to the West Virginia. Actually, that weekend, I think they had a win to get further on or something. There were all those. Michigan State had a crazy game that weekend. It was it was special, and that's what makes March Madness. Those moments. There's nothing better. There's no doubt.
The CBS guy on the broadcast said with 7 minutes to go, Illinois is now down 9, the largest deficit that they have faced the entire season. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah,
never down by more than 9 the entire season, and then you're down by 15 with 4 minutes to go. And some people could say, well, then you have all that history of the year to believe in yourself, but that can also go the other direction. If you've never been down 15, your mentality could go like, oh, I guess this is what it's like to lose. I mean, if you've not been in that situation, that was just an astounding statistic.
If you look at it, the other day somebody said, "Oh, you were so good offensively." I said, "We were really good defensively. We were so good offensively, you didn't even notice we were good defensively." If you look at the margin of difference, it's one of the best in the history. How many points we average, how many it's just that's how good we were, and we were playing small ball before small ball was invented. And, our coaches always said, Kerr was doing broadcasting at that time, and he had one of our games and like, hey, we can play small ball too. When they got to the Warriors, like I saw Illinois do that. So it was interesting and adjusting. That whole thing, those 3 guys came to me when I got the job. Darren, D, and Luther had, all 3 played in the NBA, all Americans. And when Coach Self was with them, they played 2 guards, and one of them had to be in a backup. And they said, "Can we play together?" And I said, "Yeah." And I had just come from SIU, where our 3 was our 4 was our 5. The whole thing.
You only had guards.
You had to. Yeah, we didn't. You just had to deal with it.
Sure.
And I said, "Hey, as long as one of you rebound and can." And one of them can guard a big, a big or smaller forward, and and then it went from there. Those 3 started the whole time then, and if you look at it, I don't know what it was. I saw the thing the other day. It popped up on BTN. We had 52-5 or over a stretch or something. It's just ungodly how good they were and how they bought in, and The one thing, and this is a Coach Keady saying, is share the juices. And, when I got to Illinois, there was it was a difficult thing, Bill Self and that, but
Yeah.
the share the juices, I get in the locker room, how each school would give like so many orange juices and, little waters at halftime. And like, somebody grabbed 4, somebody grabbed 3, and then the other guys wouldn't get, I'd go in the locker room, guys are fighting over orange juices. And well, we can't win a game if they're,
Yeah.
so I had a captain of the locker room, and he had to pass out like little kids with treats. And that was a little progress we made. No, I'm not kidding. But
yeah, no,
but
I mean, I see that for
Coach
sure.
Keady like always talked about, making the fancy pants was the fruit juice. When you made a fancy pass behind the back, we don't need that fruit juice, and we got to share the juices and all that. But that's how I related to it. And I talk about that all the time. The best teams, the best groups all share the juices. Everyone makes sure that everyone's included. As a leader, even the manager gets a juice,
Yeah.
gets a snack. It's it's from little kid soccer. You got kids, you got the treat at halftime after the game,
Yep.
making sure everyone feels like they're part of it. And if you do that, that's when your group is really, really successful. And that's why the best teams I've coached, the best people I've been around, they care about each other, they help each other, and that's why they have success, and that's why teams have been successful.